Good evening and welcome. My name is Abigail Carter-Simpson and I am delighted to be your host for this third webinar in the Global Investigation series, Open Source Intelligence for Due Diligence, being brought to you by investigative firm Prevail Intelligence Sanctuary. Once again, I am joined by Jonathan Benton, former head of the UK's International Corruption Unit and founding member of Intelligence Sanctuary. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Abby. Hi, everyone. Big thank you for joining us all again.
And also Damien Huntingford, OBE, former UK Special Forces Commander, intelligence practitioner and co-founder of Prevail. Hi, Damien.
Hey, good evening, Abby, and hi, everyone.
And this time we also have Daryn Liddle, a former intelligence officer from the British Army who worked extensively with Damien and the UK Special Forces and who now leads all of Prevail intelligence projects. Good evening, Daryn.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here.
This week, we're going to discuss open source intelligence, an essential part of the team, Tradecraft and Tech themes that we have discussed during this complex investigation series. And to help us tonight, we have Duane Rivett, co-founder and vice president of national security at FIVECAST, a world-leading provider of cutting-edge open source intelligence solutions. FIVECAST is an Australian company, but Duane is based in the USA office in Washington, DC. Good evening, Duane.
Thanks, Abby. Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Fantastic. So I think it would be great to start by discussing the terms in order to set out the context for tonight's discussion. Jonathan, let's start with what do we mean by due diligence compliance and who is it relevant to?
So what we're going to talk about tonight is not, first of all, what we're not going to cover is the screening bit, you know, the kind of routine volume information going through and just checking against things like sanctions, etc. What we are talking about is really the most sophisticated open source intelligence tools driven by very, very, very highly trained analysts who are seeking to find that information out that we need to do when we're doing our enhanced due diligence, our sort of enhanced due diligence, our PEPs checks, etc. When we're trying to establish if somebody actually is a PEP or connected to, etc. And it's relevant both to the regulated and unregulated sector, and I'll explain why. You know, we know the regulated sector has a very strict set of rules that they have to follow, but we're increasingly seeing pressure as well on what I kind of call the unregulated sector, which may not be the right term, but it's sectors that are getting exposed to things like money laundering, etc. And I think private schools and universities is a really good example where there's been an alert recently put out by the National Crime Agency about the concerns of illicit money. And they are of course unregulated, but will need to introduce systems and processes and the ability to interrogate into a lot more detail, you know, large donations, that sort of thing, the source of wealth, source of funds, where did it come from? And just as a kind of on a policy level, this is, you know, this need to do this really deep enhanced due diligence is of course not going to go away. It's only going to grow. We only have to read, you know, recently those who listened and may have heard the comments from David Lewis, the Executive Secretary of FATF, where he said, we need to move further into this space of using the very best tools to find out all the information we can. You know, the 6th Anti-Money Laundering Directive is literally around the corner. It's focusing largely on tax transparency, but interestingly, it's also pushing for corporate liability. And that again, you know, corporates, if you're a big international bank, or we only have to look at what's happening with NatWest and many other, particularly with the NatWest and the criminal charges, that there is this appetite to hold big financial institutions and companies to account for potential crimes. So that systems and processes and doing those really deep enhanced checks using the best tools that are available 3 years earlier might just save an awful lot of money off the share price and, reputation and risk, etc. When suddenly it's uncovered that we should have used the best tools and we didn't, and look what's happened. We've been exposed to something like a money laundering charge. So I'll hand over there to sort of over to back to Abby. But I think the next point is here. This is not going away, and the enhanced due diligence piece is only going to get only potentially going to get more challenging for us, and therefore we need the best tools.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And open source intelligence, OSINT, is part of the process then for finding the right information. Daryn?
Absolutely, Abby. So OSINT or OSINT or open source intelligence is how we find and analyze the information we need to conduct investigations or make risk-based decisions through due diligence reporting. It's a subtype of intelligence, just like imagery intelligence or signals intelligence or human intelligence, that relies on publicly available information to be collected and analyzed to create assessments on a particular topic. Now, the definition varies widely because at its simplest, it can simply be searching through the news or Google or academic articles. And at its widest, it can incorporate all the information sources that an individual or organization can legally access from free or public sources. And this can include imagery from Google Street View or blogs, registries and databases on open servers, or marketing and advertising data and financial flows. The reality is that there's more information available to us now than ever before, which means that finding the right information, verifying it, and seeing the signals in that noise and making assessments from them is more challenging than it's ever been. The ability to do this well, in my opinion, it relies on experience, human intuition, and the right application of technology. In the military intelligence world, we were blessed with possibly the widest and most advanced information collection tools available. We had everything from surveillance platforms to multispectral satellite collection and communications interception, purpose-built human source networks, all to provide a steady stream of high-grade intelligence into an all-source analysis cell. Now, that gave us an excellent experience in handling multiple information feeds and understanding how to layer them for corroboration or verification, and minimizing the complexity of information so analysts could make sense of it. Ironically, though, when you step into the commercial world, a lot of that is no longer available. So you have to learn open source really quickly or find the right technology to bring you the kind of information you know that you're looking for. And that's where our partnerships with law enforcement professionals and high-end technology providers have really pushed us forward, Abby.
Yeah, I think if I can just jump in there, Daz, thank you. There's some sort of reinforcing comments that are worth making, I think, on the commercial perspective. Certainly in the realm of DD and investigations, lots of people do claim to employ open source intelligence techniques. But I would certainly argue quite strongly that conducting a simple Google search of an individual or a company and then reading the first thread that appears from that is not really what we're talking about. And Daryn and Duane will show tonight, this is at its heart about conducting a series of swift and sophisticated searches and then having cross-correlation of that relevant information. So being able quickly to build up relevant information for analysis. And if that first part is done poorly, there's no basis for decent analysis. And it's critical to get that right. I think that's a really important sort of first point that draws on what Jonathan and Daryn said there. I guess secondly, in keeping with the themes that we've discussed a couple of times now on these webinars, it really is about the blend of skills which makes the difference here. Having the right team of analysts who are able to exercise their judgment, using the right methodology and tradecraft to be able to build up a rich picture to support the decision-making process, and then employing the right tech platforms to perform that work as quickly and efficiently as possible as an aid to human judgments. I think without those three components in place, you are not extracting the right level of meaning from the data, or, you know, worse, as alluded to, you know, you have an overload of information and you miss important factors in those judgments. So that is equally applicable, really, from the standard KYC and due diligence through to the enhanced due diligence space. It's about the analysis that's needed, and I would argue, you know, you can only really do that properly if you employ a cross-functional methodology. I think as well, in the business context, that necessary process isn't always viewed as being an enabler to business. You know, it's seen as a barrier sometimes on the cost side purely, but fundamentally, it's a process that's linked to risk, to exposure, to forming good business reputations, and of course, as a direct link to directors performing their fiduciary duties, and the broader standing of the company, you know, how they're perceived. And, you know, there are many cases of this going wrong. I mean, very recently, you'll have seen you know, Greensill and Wirecard, and, you know, a proper due diligence process, you know, using open source intelligence as one of its components is really important as a business enabler. So anyway, tonight, we thought we might approach the webinar slightly differently to the previous two, and we're going to try and give some real space for Duane and Daryn as the practitioners, really, of their craft, to show what we mean and to show what's possible. And Jonathan, his role partly will be to try and decode some of those technical terms and illustrate the commercial context for applying that open source intelligence methodology. Anyway, I hope that's helpful off the front end. Back to you, Abby.
Thank you so much, Damien. Jonathan, you mentioned the regulators that police this process and why compliance is necessary. How effective is that process overall?
I think if we, I mean, it is generally effective, and I don't, you know, it's easy to criticise. And I mentioned before the screening and the bulk screening that takes place, because there are, after all, you know, we look at there's 42.4 million financial transactions going through SWIFT year to date. That's just one method of moving money around the world. So having the processes in place that can deal with volume traffic and can detect regulatory risks is critical. Of course it is. But what I would maybe be bold enough to say is, actually, I think there's also, we're missing out on business opportunities, a little bit like back to what Damien was just saying. You know, the ability to do really sophisticated, deep, enhanced inquiries using tools like FIVECAST and other sources of information allow us now to sometimes kind of right the wrongs as well. And by that I mean, you will see sometimes there's people have got quite a colourful past on the maybe on the internet. They've got a colourful business past, and they're you know, the people aren't on board in them. Jurisdictions are being, you know, I was only talking in Jersey yesterday about the challenges there that certain sectors are having with onboarding clients because of the level of compliance now. Well, actually, this kind of intrusive, you know, doing this really detailed process up front, which we'll talk about, can be a business enabler as well, and important. But we mustn't forget also that it is critical. This enhanced level of due diligence, you know, is Greens has been mentioned, but we only have to look at what the challenges that happened with Deutsche Bank over Eastern Europe. Wirecard was mentioned. You know, I'd be interested to see what comes out of the inquiry into the EY due diligence that they did in Germany at the point of taking on the task of auditing those accounts, because that is all now in the spotlight, and it's when it's in the spotlight, it's a very uncomfortable place to be. So I think, you know, the tech has got a great, there's some fantastic tech out there. I really like FIVECAST. I think you'll find it interesting to see what they can do, and therefore I'll, you know, pass back over to sort of Daryn and yourself.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Daryn, it might be helpful to sort of talk through the way in which this is done in order to illustrate the practical steps behind this process.
Sure, Abby. So we rely on the intelligence process, and the intelligence process is a well-known cycle, which we rely on to dig deeper and deeper until we're satisfied we've got enough of the right information to analyze and make the assessments on. So the cycle is very well known. It's, you know, directing, collecting, processing, and then disseminating before we redirect and start the process all over again, regardless of the type of information that we're collecting. Now, initially, we'll generally start with public registries, news and social media collection on individuals and companies, and build out those structures. And this allows us to paint a picture of who or what the entity is, and then build up the network that sits around it. We look for patterns that can indicate either red flags or anomalies that require deeper investigation. It's traditionally a time-consuming task that can take countless analyst hours to sift through huge swathes of information. Once we complete that, we then go below the surface and we go into deep and dark web searches for specific clues, but these are far more specific searches and queries. And this will give us an initial picture which our analysts can look at and see where we need to plug information gaps or question the veracity of the information, or then refer to appropriate human sources to add a bit of context and the detail to particular aspects of that investigation or the research. Now, this is always a human judgment, and it relies on intuition and on experience. Once this is complete, we then move on to alternative collection, more bespoke to that particular inquiry. So this could be media mining or social media scraping, or even satellite imagery analysis and ad tech data tracking. And this second round of inquiries usually gives us more start points, or it eliminates potential lines of inquiry so we can focus on the most relevant points. We decide on these priorities, and then the cycle just starts again. We repeat this over and over until we're satisfied we've got enough information to answer the question posed by the client. Now, when we started doing this, the process was quite laborious because we needed to be thorough. And despite trying several platforms, both ourselves and on behalf of some of our clients, we just couldn't find the right tools. Our mantra has always been use technology wherever you can, and the human element where you absolutely need it. And about a year ago, we were introduced to FIVECAST, which answered our platform questions, as it replicates our methodology and enhances rather than replaces the human analyst. It delivers, in my opinion, more accurate information rather than more information, and it's directed by human judgment and augmented by AI rather than the other way around. And since discovering, we've actually worked very closely with Duane and his team, who can probably talk through the platform and why it's so powerful in this space.
Yeah, thanks, Daryn. Look, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me on. And maybe I'll introduce myself and FIVECAST. So for some context, FIVECAST is a world-leading provider of digital intelligence solutions, and we enable public and private organizations to explore masses of data and uncover these actionable insights that people are looking for, the analysts are looking for. So our capabilities are purpose-built to address national security use cases. We're used in law enforcement, defense, corporate security, and in due diligence. So we deploy advanced data collection and AI-enabled analytics, as Daryn was mentioning. And we do that to help people solve their complex intelligence challenges. So we sell a software solution, it's called FIVECAST Onyx, and it combines this open source data collection and analysis to these vast quantities of unstructured and multimedia data as well. So we perform unique and proprietary data collection and deliver superior data access across the surface web, as Daryn was saying, the deep web, and we also delve into the dark web. So you don't have to, I guess. So FIVECAST Onyx can be set up to monitor, interpret a range of multimedia data. So we're not just stuck with the text. We analyze images, we do analyze text, we analyze videos, and we do things like detect keywords. We detect phrases and quotes and logos, and it's all of these things that are defined by the analyst. But that's where we use our artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we're constantly increasing these capabilities over time. What we deploy is our unique risk detection framework. We also do advanced network analysis, so you can understand the interactions that people are having online, and also sentiment and emotion detection. And we do this to deliver really an unmatched ability to predict and detect threats or events across a range of digital landscapes. Abby?
Thank you so much. Are either of you able to show us some of that? It would really, really help paint a picture of what we're talking about and perhaps help bring it to life.
Yeah, sure, of course. So up front, I can give you a real world example of where our capability was used in action. So back in 2017, an Australian government department uncovered it was a multi-million-dollar fraud within a welfare subsidy program using our tool. So while we can't give you the details, I can say that the tool used open source information to quickly demonstrate that the targets, the subjects of the investigation, were in a specific location at a specific time. And the great part of the story is that this fraud was actually detected when they first just took up a 2-week trial of our capability, and they said, let's put this investigation into the FIVECAST capability, and they uncovered the fraud ring, which made it relatively easy for them to push up the line and get us over the line in that department. So, but really this demonstrates that the tool is powerful, but it sort of works hand in glove with the analysts, and there's really not a large amount of product training required. I think we've got a couple of slides which we'll boot up. These are just generic examples. So on the screen, you can see an example of our capability in action. So this is an image we collected online. It's a very Australian image, so it makes me feel a bit homesick being over here in Washington, DC. You can see an image of a car, or what we'd call a ute in Australia, but what the Americans would call a pickup truck. So this image was posted online by the target of an investigation, and we used our AI-powered image analytics were being deployed on this image, and they're telling us what it actually tells us. It might be a little bit small in the bottom left corner, but it's telling us there's a car in this image. The other technology that's being deployed here is OCR, or optical character recognition. So it's scanning the image for text, and you can see it's picking up the license plate of the car. It's also picking up a URL, which is printed on the engine. So using this type of technology, this can allow the analyst to filter through thousands of images or videos to find the information you're looking for. It could be used to match a street sign or a license plate or something like that.
Duane, we found this hugely valuable to our investigative work, especially when we're doing asset tracing investigations. Previously, our analysts, they'd have to trawl through thousands of photos looking for cars or planes we could identify as assets, and then have to do it manually. Now it's all automated, which means they can set the searches for particular types of assets that we're looking for, whether those are cars or planes or something else. And we can log all the relevant ones we find when they're coming up. Now, the beauty of this is because that's done so quickly, it actually sets up loads of new searches for us, because we can set up new image searches based on the descriptions of that particular vehicle and see where else they've turned up. The fact that we can get vehicle registration numbers or tail registration numbers means we can be incredibly specific about the searches that we're doing, and it saves us immense time. And we can find additional details from that, whether we're looking for addresses associated to those vehicles, for instance. So, the image analytics gives us incredible options for the additional inquiries we want to use, whether it's traditional or bespoke collection technologies, especially the OCR capability, Duane.
Thanks, Daryn. I think we've got another image here. In this image, we can see some bikies, and they've posted these images online. So this is an image from an OMCG, or Outlaw Motorcycle Gang investigation. Another Australian example. You can see in this example, we're also reading the license plate. We're reading text on the t-shirt. We're also detecting image concepts, very similar. So the concept detection can be used to really detect any concept. We've had customers detecting guns, money, explosions, fires, police, protest. And the cool thing about the OCR is it works in over 100 different languages. So it's not just English. We do you can perform investigations. You can be using Russian, Chinese, you name it. And then we can also translate that back into English.
Duane, this has been the single biggest game changer for us. And to be honest, I wasn't aware of how powerful this could be when I was still in the military. But what it's meant now is that we can essentially take descriptions of individuals from witness statements or affidavits to look to find people at specific events or locations based on what they were wearing or what they were driving. Because we can pick up logos on t-shirts or caps, we can describe the color of the particular items of clothing that they're wearing, and then do geo searches around a particular area to see what comes up. And that then allows us to find alternate sources of that information. It allows us to set these new lines of inquiries, which can be associated to addresses, for instance, or other vehicles. And actually, one of the interesting ones we've come up recently is tattoos on individuals, particularly if they're words, because that can help us draw up a profile of an individual and help us narrow down the searches, which JB, I think you and your team have found this tremendously useful in setting up profiles for individuals, haven't you?
Yeah, and it's almost it's almost like an evidential level of optical recognition, unique recognition, because some of these tattoos, and particularly in this instance here, are unique. You're not going to find that pattern necessarily anywhere else on another individual. So it can certainly take us quite far down the road evidentially.
Great. Yeah, look, just changing tact a little bit. So as I mentioned previously, you can use the technology to track locations. So that can be as simple as concept detection, which we've already spoken about, but it can be used to find generic locations. So let's say if you're interested in somebody being on a beach or a road or even a recognizable landmark like the Eiffel Tower. In addition, you can track platform, if the platform you're accessing supports locations, we can also geolocate that to a map. So if somebody checks in, posts from a certain event, posts from a certain location, we can follow that on a map and it gives you a date and time stamp.
Duane, many of the social media platforms now are limiting the accuracy of their geostamps. So whenever we get these, we have to use other systems to become more accurate. So for example, if we get a geostamp for a city, we would then look to imagery analysis to isolate buildings or houses in the area in order to identify those specific locations. Or we can actually turn to our ad tech telemetry data to find movement patterns of people and devices. I think you're also going to show us how we can link other associations together, aren't you, Duane?
Yeah, exactly. So on the next slide, which is another extract from our platform. So to take a step back, online platforms allow users to interact online. You can post, mention, tag someone in a photo, you can react, you can connect in various different ways. So FIVECAST Onyx, the software platform, provides users with this visualization of these interactions that they have online. So this is a way an analyst can understand who is talking to who. They can understand common connections. So sometimes you have two separate connections. You can find common connections between two known individuals and maybe find the connection between two individuals who aren't directly linked. We can also combine this with our other risk detectors. So you can understand what topics they're talking about. So you can blast out and interact with this network chart. And this is something that is virtually impossible to do if you're just looking at online sources. This is data that we actually extract and present to the analyst.
And Duane, the link and network analysis is the foundation of a good investigation for us. But that analysis is always dependent on how well the network has been built out. And with so many aspects of metadata that can be collected, we can set specific ontologies that are important for that particular task, whether that's the strength of a connection through communication, or the weight of an association by how many mutual connections they have, which means the data is dynamic and responsive to our needs and that of the task at hand. So for instance, when we're looking at attack-related data, rather than looking for a gun, we can look for a specific type of gun in a specific city at a specific time and get either all the imagery or the associations around that. Or if we're looking to understand a group, we can add in logos, language used, and even some of the sentiment associated with language or phrases from particular aspects of literature which they may use often, which means we get a lot of the more accurate information really quickly, but each investigation is bespoke. And I suppose, Abby, it really allows us to turn masses of data into these really specific bits of information which we're looking for very quickly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for the overview. That was extremely helpful. Jonathan, over to you. I'm sure you have some supporting points on the financial investigation side.
I think financial investigation and the kind of investigation and ultimately the legal side of transitioning from taking intelligence and turn it into evidence, which is the critical step, and it's often the bit that I think certainly I'm witnessing more and more often in the commercial sector, an understanding that it must be turned into robust evidence that can be scrutinised properly at court is not necessarily always understood. But one thing I would say, just quickly going back though to Duane's network analysis, and I've got some examples we'll talk about a bit later, but also this kind of ability to capture data. When imagine if you're looking at a pet or somebody that's reasonably well known, has got a reasonable profile, and you're trying to understand movements, associations, even links to assets, etc. Well, actually, by using this capability in a sophisticated and intelligent way, you can capture an awful lot of information very quickly that you wouldn't necessarily pick up, which is, I think, the critical bit. The other bit I would say about that is it saves time. So historically, some of this would have taken a long, long time if done almost like manually. And the fact it saves time means it's much more efficient for the client, and it costs the client less money, which is really important. But just back to the kind of legal bit, there is, certainly we at Prevail Intelligence Sanctuary have very, very robust legal processes and an application of when we're going to look at somebody, the justification for why we're going to look at somebody, what's our legal remit, what are the parameters we can work in. All of that is recorded. We tailor it so that we're ensuring that whatever we're gathering is absolutely meets the client's needs, but also means we're operating within the law. And I mentioned about this kind of transition of intelligence to evidence. The other bit this does do is we know online things can change really, really quickly. Really quickly. However, by using sophisticated tools like this, means you get to the information, you can then very quickly go to the original source. We use tools like Snagit and things like that to then record it to a level, record our actions to a level that would normally be adopted for a criminal court. So that actually for our clients, when we're doing private prosecutions, we're taking private action, through the High Court, etc. We are absolutely confident that the evidence gathering process is robust and will stand up to scrutiny. And my final bit there as well is that I just kind of, having led complex investigations and that sort of thing for many, many years, kit's great, but the people are great and even more important as well. So it is, those that have listened to me talking on other webinars will have heard me use this kind of Formula One car analogy. You can build the Formula One car, but I'm a really, really rubbish driver. My wife will will second that. There's no way I could drive a Formula One car. But you do need really well-trained analysts. And the great thing is what we've done is we've put analysts and investigators side by side, much like they would exist in perhaps in an enforcement type environment. And that means you can drive this kit to the maximum and absolutely get the most out of it really, really quickly. I'll hand back there. Back to you, Abby.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Perhaps one issue that we do face is just the sheer number of open source intelligence tools that seem to be available now. I wonder, Duane, how do we know which ones are effective? Like, how do people distinguish your Googles from your Ask Jeeves? What makes for an effective OSINT tool?
Yeah, I think, Jonathan's, attacked some of these points around the Formula One car. We're trying to build the Formula One car, but we do need the drivers. Look, from FIVECAST's point of view, we deliver access to a large number of online platforms. So we do well over 750 plus dark web platforms. We do surface web. We rapidly automate targeted collection on the surface web. And we basically, it's all the stuff that's accessible through manual browsing. We're not getting any information that isn't already accessible. So I will stress a couple of points. So we do targeted collection, and we only automate what is performed currently manually by analysts. So also note, this data is this is data that the user, so the target, has voluntarily put into the public domain. So this isn't mass surveillance. This isn't scanning and finding the bad guy or finding someone doing the wrong thing. This is when you start an investigation and the analyst is actually investigating that individual or that group. The issue that we're constantly dealing with is the volume, the speed, and the complexity of online data makes it difficult for analysts to filter and identify the most relevant and risky data sets. So we deal essentially with risk. How do we get through 1,000 images quickly to get to the one that's of interest? So intelligence efforts are also hampered by a constantly evolving range of online platforms used by the targets and shifts in their online behavior. So new platforms are always emerging and others are always decreasing in popularity. And I assume everyone listening would have experienced this. There's a new platform next week that everyone seems to be going on, and the platform you're familiar with is gone and not really used. And, especially people with teenage children would probably understand this point. So one of the things we do is keep up with where people are moving to. So just reinforce, we're not trying to replace the human analysts. They're the real experts. They're the ones trying to solve the intelligence challenge. They have expertise in the mission. We're simply the force multiplier. We provide the targeted collection across open source and the AI-enabled risk detection framework. And the key point here, there was a question in the chat about AI, and one thing I just maybe want to stress is this isn't a black box AI that makes the decision for the analyst. This doesn't say this is a bad guy, this is a good guy, this person's doing the right thing. It's a tool that the analyst uses to say, find a car, for example, or find the text they're looking for, rather than manually watching the video or looking through thousands of images or reading thousands of posts which are irrelevant to what they're looking at. So in a nutshell, we're looking to save hours and hours of manual repetitive work, allowing analysts to use their brain and their expertise to focus their energy on the mission and solving the problem. Daryn, did you have thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, Duane, I mean, for me, it's this AI-enabled risk detection framework that makes the human and machine partnership so powerful. The system enhances the analyst by doing all the heavy lifting, but it allows the analyst unparalleled access to information, and crucially, the ability to ask really specific questions of the data available, which, as you said, saves time and money. So for instance, we change our risk detectors, and by risk detectors, I just mean search strings or search queries. We build up these complex search query strings, which we push through the platforms. But we change them through each investigation, depending on what we need to achieve for that particular phase. So as an example, on a recent corruption investigation in sub-Saharan Africa, we're working with a partner organization that had been conducting that investigation in country for about 2 years. And they'd started hitting brick walls. They were running out of leads and they couldn't travel anymore due to lockdown. So when we partnered with them, our first set of detectors collected information about the companies involved in the corruption. We used the optical character recognition. We were reading the names of companies on advertising billboards for some events they were having in country and marketing campaigns in that area. And this was essentially to identify the potential bad guys we should be looking into. We then changed them once we understood that network to discover individuals associated to those companies that were in the UK or Europe so that we could interview them, because we needed to find the good guys that knew what the bad guys were up to. And the detectors prioritize our potential interviewees by location, strength of connection to key individuals, how recently they'd been associated to those companies. And we then interviewed selected individuals to an evidential standard and corroborated their stories through open source. We added satellite imagery analysis to some of them to confirm whether changes in construction in some of the areas had indeed taken place. And in about 3 months, we put together an evidential pack, which could successfully be handed over to a Western national law enforcement organization that's now handling the prosecution case. And our partner organization said we achieved more in information terms in the 3 months than they'd been able to do in the previous 2 years, because of the sophistication of the tools and the speed of information of collection. And the beauty of it is, we couldn't replicate their knowledge of the investigation. They'd been buried in it for 2 years. So we were essentially just data providers. We found the information, very specific answers to the questions that they were asking, and they interpreted them and assessed them to put together a successful evidential pack. And that really is the power of the systems and the tradecraft that enhance the analyst or investigator rather than try to replace them, Abby.
Thank you, Daryn. I'm really interested in the legal position on the use of OSINT within the UK market. What sort of parameters exist, Jonathan?
I think before I jump onto that, can I just take the liberty of just going back to something Daryn just said, and so apologies everyone, but I think it is also quite important to bear in mind in these circumstances when we're talking about essentially who our clients are, whether they be NGOs all the way through to international banks. And but the other point is that what I find frankly very, very useful about having tools like this, which actually I didn't have only a few years ago when I was in law enforcement leading international corruption investigations, is the ability to pinpoint us in the right area. So whether that's identifies a network and a relationship, which then allows us to then search registers, which allows us to find connections to companies, which then finds the asset hidden underneath it. It is that process of joining the dots where we wouldn't have had the connection because we'd never have known about the relationships. We wouldn't have searched for that person as a director across all corporate registries. We would never have found the assets sat underneath it had we not seen the connection originally in the work that would take place on FIVECAST. So it is a fusion, and it's that richness that it adds. But the legal point, Abby, sorry, back to what you asked me to answer. I think the other really important legal point here is, I'm not a lawyer, but I get quite tied up with the legal side because I did go to law school many years ago. But because it is so important, and it is frankly where things can go go wrong. We've got very strict EU and UK data protection laws now, which have come in since 2018, and my perception, working with this is actually that it allows us to be far more proportionate and not do what the law doesn't want us to do, which is to scrape and gather lots of information and hold on to it, which actually personal information. It actually allows us to almost be very specific and go right down and only take what we need to take, which is proportionate and ethical to the investigation that we're conducting, and not gathering that big mass. So actually, I think using these sort of sophisticated tools is actually allowing us to very much act within the spirit of the law and what the law really wants us to do. I'll kind of hand back to you, Abby and Duane, because I'm sure we want to try and give some examples soon, hopefully.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, let's move on to you, Duane. What sorts of limitations or challenges are there with these OSID technologies?
Yeah, and I think, Jonathan hit it on the head there. It is part of a piece of the puzzle. It's one tool in the toolbox, so to speak. Open source intelligence. It points you in the right direction, and it needs to be driven by someone. I would like to reinforce that point that Jonathan made about proportional. So I think I made it previously, but we're a targeted platform. We're not doing mass surveillance. We're being used to target a certain individual or a certain piece of information and bring that back. We're not sucking up the internet and storing personal data for lots of people. One of the points I'd reinforce is we need to sort of steer clear of the mainstream social media. Well, not steer clear, but we need to increase the breadth beyond just monitoring mainstream social media platforms. People that are doing nefarious things are often on more fringe platforms. They can be on the dark web. So we should start constantly monitoring and adapting as they emerge. I'd also say that this automated and continuous collection and data storage is very useful, because we don't know when sites are going to go down. A good example is earlier this year, post January 6, when Parler was taken down. There was a lot of information in Parler that was of a lot of interest to organizations in the US, of course. And so if that data is stored, and sort of indexed and searchable, that's really great. So this includes mainstream sites, down to places like dark web, bunker chans, and other less accessible platforms that are emerging. Yeah, back to you, Abby.
Thank you so much, Duane. Great. Daryn, what are your thoughts on that issue?
Well, Abby, from our experience, you need to have a range of tools and techniques for your analysts to use on each investigation or intelligence problem. And you need to know what questions to ask of the data available to you. So, for example, in that recent corruption investigation that we handed over to national law enforcement, the key was for us to identify the friendlies that could be interviewed for witness statements, so we could build up an evidence pack. And that was done through the FIVECAST platform, through social media interactions and associations. On another project, we monitor smuggling groups and their activity in a specific region of Africa for a supply chain company. And here we've learned that the groups themselves communicate over a number of social media platforms so as to break up their communications. So we have to identify and then monitor the groups across these platforms. And through that, we've identified that they use the coded language that they use. One group uses musical metaphors, talking about orchestras and conductors and particular musicians, which differentiate members in the supply chain, whilst another uses pirate metaphors. And we can then link these code words to locations and assess either the threats that those groups will pose to existing supply chain companies, or actually also whether or not the employees of the logistics providers are involved in these activities. On a third due diligence investigation on behalf of an environmental group, we combine the corporate structure work and financial flow analysis to determine the depth of shell companies in an energy exploration company in Africa, which is really harnessing the expertise of Jonathan's team and their financial investigative backgrounds. We then used imagery analysis from satellite imagery to discover the exploration activities, ground scarring, and where it was occurring. And we confirmed that with human sources, a network that we built up specific for that investigation. And we realized actually that they were breaking the contractual agreement they received from the government. So that could then be handed over for enforcement. So, there are a wide range of applications for the OSINT work, but with the right tools and experience, you're able to get the answers that you need. It's really very powerful, Abby.
Brilliant, thank you. And perhaps, Jonathan, you could provide a vignette to help tie some of these themes together.
Yeah, no, more than happy to. So the case I'm going to talk about is, I can't go into specifics, as so often is the issue with these relatively high profile matters. But one thing that we've, first of all, the start of it, the political corruption side of it, was the image collection was able to very quickly allow us to start using some reverse imagery tools and quickly locate the buildings and premises and the sort of, the balcony and where certain people were sitting, which one might say the land, yeah, but the next thing was we've identified that that's a several £1 million apartment, penthouse apartment. The next thing we find is how that's owned and how then other assets are owned, and essentially how this person's holding all their assets at arm's length. Why? Because there's not a cat in hell's chance they'd have been able to afford that on their legitimate salary. And that's why, it's the classic sort of corruption thing where I need to keep it at arm's length. The other bit, I think the interesting bit about the examples of the network, and what we have found also very useful, is professional people, lawyers, bankers, insolvency practitioners, board members of international companies, and where deals have gone slightly, have gone wrong, or there's allegations of crime, or there's issues with it, and you start looking at it, and you look at people, and you try to understand the network, and actually what you find is you'd have to do an awful lot of research and trawling through different to be able to suddenly find the network and the connections between people who ordinarily shouldn't be connected. There's no kind of logical reason, really. You can't see a logical reason for why these people should be connected on a social media channel or something. But what it then does start to do is to start saying, well, hang on a minute, if they are connected, they do know each other, then maybe this is how this kind of this conspiracy, and what one has to be careful here, this is not evidence, it's just building blocks. It's starting to show us relationships that we can then dig further, and maybe, but my point being is that sometimes people, in this particular scenario, one would say they absolutely didn't know each other. There was a professional that really shouldn't have conducted their role in dealing with assets simply because he, should have discharged himself because of connections, and it starts to help you sort of build the picture that you're going, right, we can probably see what's going on here and how it works. I'll hand back to you, Abby, because I think we've probably only got about 5 or 6 minutes, haven't we?
Brilliant, thank you so much. And we do have a few minutes just to take some questions. So our first question for Duane and Daryn, I know we touched on the AI part earlier, but Daryn, perhaps you could elaborate. This one asks, you converging technology like AI and blockchain together for delivering the transparency you're talking about?
Yeah, for the convergence of AI, I'll rely on Duane for the expertise there.
Sure. Yeah, look, I think I'll just reinforce some of the things I was talking about previously. Our AI, it isn't a black box. It's simply a tool that's used by analysts to analyze images, analyze text, analyze videos, and help them speed up. So rather than them reading content, looking through images, we're not really replicating anything. We don't do any blockchain, so maybe I'll hand back to Daryn to answer the blockchain piece as well.
Yeah, sure, Duane. I mean, blockchain analysis and crypto tracing used to be niche stuff, but it's now it's part of the future. It's becoming more mainstream, particularly for some of our investigations. We kind of got forced into it because when we're tracing assets, a lot of them are now being purchased by cryptocurrency, multiple wallets, multiple exchanges internationally. And there's a lot of crypto related frauds that are being conducted, both in the currency itself and the purchasing of assets. Now, the beauty is that the blockchain has an audit trail because it's actually written into the blockchain itself. But in most instances, it becomes a bulk data analysis task in order to actually trace those movements. So we use expertise and tools, and we build capabilities through partnerships very much like with ISL and FIVECAST. And there are some specific providers we use that identify and log suspicious crypto exchanges and wallets and can do the trace of cryptocurrencies through those. We have to grow our expertise in that area. I think everyone does, and it's a constantly evolving market. So we're trying to continue our growing and understanding of that as a threat to fraud and asset tracing investigations.
Just to add, though, very quickly as well, those of you that have an interested, you know, Darren's talking about one of our current cases, and we've got, it's fascinating that we've literally very quickly been able to take money out of going through 2 different European exchanges into somewhere the other side of the world. And I'm not going to say any more because it's still a subject, a live investigation, and one that we're actually working with a number of law enforcement agencies in different countries to share our information with them. But there is some really good tools out there. There's some fantastic commercial tools. Some of you may come across them, but chain analysis is one. There's a number of others that but there's also some interesting free tools that are being developed. There's one that's just come out of an Austrian, academic institution that's actually very good as well. And we're also really lucky that some of the experts in this field who've been kind of online buying drugs, guns, etc., covertly, as you know, legitimate, legally, lawfully in preventing serious and organised crime, are now sort of coming to the end of their career. And trust me, and we're trying to recruit them as fast as we can. So so yeah, it is developing, like Dan says.
Thank you, Jonathan. We've got time for one last question, and this one is for Damien. This question asks, what sort of ethics frameworks do you recommend for use with tools and techniques like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for us, you know, the start point is being really clear that we are centered on, you know, doing reputation enhancing work. You know, that's something which we care about very, very sort of dearly. All of our work starts with, I guess, a sort of leadership review and legal advice, you know, right off the top. You know, who are we working for and what are we being asked to do? And we always provide, I guess, a sort of red team judgment check internally to make sure that we're confident and content, ready to proceed, and that we're doing stuff that's, I guess, in the spirit of what's at the core of the business. You know, that's really important. I guess people will have heard of, you know, the Daily Mail test about whether, you know, what you're doing, if it was reported in the Daily Mail, would it be positive or negative? I have a sort of slight variation on that, which I've found serves me well, which is, you know, can I explain it in simple terms and justify it to my 3 children? And I think if I can do that, then that's usually sort of sufficient, really. You know, it's been able to sort of confidently sort of move forward. And I think for all of us, really, with our backgrounds, you know, we've had careers which were founded on good judgment. And if there are doubts about the type of work or what we're being asked to do, then really there is no doubt. You know, that is the guide. And in that instance, it's definitely a case of being very clear with the client and saying no. And we've had a number of examples of that. I mean, one that came up last week actually was something which we turned down because we felt as though what we were being asked to do could be used to effectively sort of spy on an internal population for sort of political purposes. And obviously that's not something we want to get involved with. So this is about, I think, sort of being very clear on what sort of business you are, what sort of people you are, and sort of how you want to do business, frankly. And as a sort of side note, that advisory work on ethical frameworks is a sort of a service we have delivered actually in the past, because it is I say it is something which is really important to us. And you know, you have to have a strong moral compass to work in this space, particularly with open source technologies and tradecraft and sort of what's possible, really. But we have found that over the long term, clients value that that honesty and the value that they get from us, by being absolutely straight down the line and unequivocal about what we're prepared to do, because clients are looking to us, back to one of my original points, to mitigate risk. And if we don't play with a straight bat and are honest with them and show integrity around our tradecraft and techniques, then all we are doing is serving to put more risk into the client space, which is obviously not good at all. So it's central to our business. Hopefully that answers the question.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Damien. So we are coming to the end of this webinar. Any final points before we finish from Jonathan or Damien?
Just to say that essentially this is all very, very versatile. And I think coming back to my original point about enhanced due diligence, where FATF is taking, and I am directing this, of course, towards much of the regulators, so the financial legal sectors, but the pressure to look deeper and understand more and be able to prove source of wealth, source of funds, enhanced due diligence is not going to go away. It's only increasing. So therefore, that's why using, frankly, 10 years ago, it was huge. People would go and talk to people, and that there's so much information online now. It's about being able to interrogate that properly and come back with a clear, crystal clear picture that you can make a judgment, a sound business decision, and move forward. And that's what it does.
Yeah, and I think, I guess from my side, I would just emphasise and end really by saying, I think, it's the application of open source intelligence, which is the specific skill. It's that requires training and experience to do properly in the financial and legal sector. You've got to understand that landscape and the technical specifics around language, around everything that's related to that specific case. And we use a number of platforms like FIVECAST as part of our toolkit, because commercially, the more efficient you are, the better value for money it is for the client. And I think to emphasize a theme really from all of these webinars, hopefully this shows, I think, the power of this being a team sport, and having effective partnerships and cross-functional teams. I think it's the only way that you can deliver the right level of analysis and support client operations. So that's all from me. Thanks, Abby.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So we have come to the end of our webinar. As usual, we will make this webinar available after the session. A special thank you to Duane and Daryn, and thank you, as always, to Jonathan and Damien. Most importantly, thank you all for joining us this evening. I've been Abigail Carter-Simpson. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.
Bye, everyone.